Greetings, folks. More warnings here from scientists about the big one, the next massive megaquake to potentially strike California. And as we've seen in many reports from seismologists, geologists, other different scientists, and what have you, this is not a matter of if, but when it will occur. And as we'll see in a lot of these reports here that I'm going to link you guys up with in the description box below, these fault systems, not only there in California, but in many other regions around the world, are long overdue for high magnitude quakes, according to experts. And so this piece here from the Los Angeles Times came out, I believe it was yesterday, talking about how California scientists are warning of a megaquake, the big one, and how it's going to happen no matter how much people want to deny it. And, you know, it goes on to talk about how fear of earthquakes is just part of life there in California, and people experience this anxiety in different ways. It goes on to talk about, for some, the fear prompts them to take steps to protect themselves, strapping down heavy furniture, securing kitchen cabinets, and retrofitting homes and apartments. And for others, the fear prompts denial, a willful ignorance of the dangers until the ground starts shaking, the report says. According to seismologist Lucy Jones, she spent her entire career trying to understand public attitudes about earthquakes with a focus on moving people past paralysis and denial. Jones said the way experts like her used to talk about earthquakes wasn't very effective. They tended to focus on the probability of a major earthquake striking in the next 30 years, the length of a typical home mortgage, and they also took pains to say what they didn't know, which she now believes allowed the public to tune out and hope for the best. Now, it goes on to say, she is making a dramatically different point, emphasizing that a devastating earthquake will definitely happen and that there is much that the public in the affected regions can do to protect themselves. And she goes on to talk about how denial may be getting a bit harder these days, and that over the last several years, a few California cities have taken dramatic steps to require retrofits of thousands of vulnerable buildings there. And we've seen the same thing just north on the west coast up in Vancouver, BC, Canada. And so it goes on to mention that next year, scientists and the U.S. Geological Survey are expected to unveil the first limited public phase of an earthquake early warning system that would eventually offer seconds and perhaps more than a minute of warning through smartphones and computers. And the system has been planned for years, but goes on to talk about in the piece here how it still could be derailed by budget cuts proposed by United States President Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, I'll link you up to another piece here talking about this early warning system that they're intending to roll out, as it says here in the piece. And the headline of this piece, predicting the big one in California, is to roll out this early warning system. And it goes on to mention here, the state of California will begin the rollout of an earthquake early warning system in the spring of 2018, according to statements made during an annual Japan Geoscience Union and American Geophysical Union meeting. And so there you have it, folks. You've got another California seismologist coming out and warning of a potential megaquake, the big one, and how it is going to definitely happen, no matter how much people want to deny it. And that's just echoing the sentiments that have been coming out of lots of different scientists, seismologists, and geologists, as I've mentioned previously in the video, warning of the imminent potential of a significantly large earthquake, potentially on the scale of that which struck Japan in March of 2011 in the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And I also wanted to share a couple other articles with you guys here that relate to what we're talking about as the warnings continue of the big one to hit the west coast of the United States, specifically in California. You know, I wanted to talk about the San Andreas and their sister faults, and we've seen lots of activity recently even in these areas. But in California, you know, when most people think about fault systems and fault lines, their thoughts are immediately drawn to the San Andreas and to a lesser extent the Hayward Fault. But in Northern California, there is almost no seismicity on the San Andreas. Instead, the majority of the earthquakes, it says in the report here that I'll link you guys up with, occur on faults that are parallel to and east of the San Andreas Fault. These faults are part of the greater San Andreas system and are capable of generating large magnitude earthquakes, according to official reports. And I've talked about this in previous videos as well, and shared previous reports from scientists and geologists with you guys. And this is one of the latest. And in this piece, I just want to take a look here at two of these faults, the Macama Fault and the Bartlett Spring Fault. And these faults lie approximately 50 kilometers and 80 kilometers east, respectively, of the San Andreas. As you see here, the San Andreas and the other two faults here that we're going to focus on just briefly. And all of these faults are members of the greater transform boundary between the Pacific and North American tectonic plates, a margin primarily composed of nearly pure right lateral strike-slip faults. And both the Macama and the Bartlett Springs faults are known to be active based on the seismicity and creep. The creep implies there is a very slow, relatively continuous motion on a fault due to tectonic deformation. And while faults that creep tend to not rupture in large earthquakes, the Hayward Fault, running through the San Francisco East Bay, creeps and has ruptured in magnitude 7 plus quakes. So it's not a black and white rule here. Okay, and this Tembler map that I've got pulled up shows the major faults in Northern California. And what is evident from this map here is that the San Andreas shows almost no seismicity, which the Macama and Bartlett Springs faults show significant activity. And it should be pointed out that the cluster of earthquakes south of Clear Lake are hydrothermally induced, it says. And so it goes on to talk a little bit more about the different dynamics at play, but it does mention here that while the San Andreas may be capable of producing larger earthquakes than either the Macama or Bartlett Springs faults, quakes on both of these could be very damaging based on their relative lengths. Magnitude 7.5 earthquakes are possible on either the Macama or Bartlett Springs faults. And such a quake could be devastating to the regions there, and it specifically mentions, the city of Ukiah, which sits right on the Macama Fault. And based on the global earthquake activity rate model, which is available in Tembler, and we'll look at that, the likely earthquake in your lifetime for this part of California is a magnitude 6.25 plus. So anywhere from 6.2 in the Richter scale upward, okay? And this model uses global strain rates and seismicity since 1977 to forecast future events. And what this suggests is that a magnitude 7.5 earthquake would be a unique event, but nonetheless very possible given the geographical dynamics of the region here. And so here's another Tembler map I wanted to share. And this Tembler map shows basically the global earthquake activity rate, or the GEAR, the GEAR model for Northern California. And what this shows is that around the Macama and Bartlett Springs faults, a magnitude 6.2 plus earthquake is likely in our lifetime, folks. And it goes on to mention in the piece here that the Cascadia Fault also deserves a bit of extra attention because its southernmost extent in Santa Rosa, there is a step over with the Rogers Creek Fault. And because of their close proximity, it is possible that an earthquake originating on the Rogers Creek Fault could rupture onto the Cascadia Fault or vice versa. And this has serious implications for the city of Santa Rosa, which suffered heavy damage, it mentions in the piece here, back in the 1906 earthquake. And what all of this indicates is that while San Andreas may get all the publicity, Northern California has many other large faults, folks, capable of generating large earthquakes. And more studies have come to show recently that they're all interconnected. And depending where a large earthquake occurs, it could set off seismic activity along potentially all of them, depending on what happens and what type of geological event were to occur. And, of course, you can get into the whole Cascadia Subduction zone. And, I mean, people have been warning of this for a very long time. And as we've seen again, they're saying it's not a matter of if, but when. And, of course, my friends, you know, this is prophesied in the scriptures. Jesus said that there would be great earthquakes in diverse places. And we're seeing this intensify globally as time goes on here. Okay, and this is just another bit of foreshadowing of these end-time events here. So it goes on to show in the piece here, as you see, it shows some of the quakes here. That's what the dots are. But this is the likelihood of of earthquakes in this particular region. And you see right in here, that's the likelihood of a magnitude, potentially a magnitude 7.5 to 8 earthquake in this region right here. Okay, so again, I'll link you guys up to it so you can check it out in the description box below. But I want to finish with this last piece here. And it's actually from last year, and it was released after Italy had had serious earthquake activity that had killed hundreds of people. And experts came out and they warned that disastrous earthquakes were imminent as the planet is overdue for high magnitude earthquakes along Earth's largest fault lines. And it's not just there in California, but that is a major point there around the Ring of Fire, which is obviously very seismically active and a massive seismic hazard for, you know, historical geological events. And the UTS Geotechnical and Earthquake Engineering Senior Lecturer, Dr. Behzad Fatahi, warned back then when this piece was released, this was last year, that no one in the world is safe, he said, and that the question isn't if they will occur, but when. Okay, that's not just, that's a scientific professor who studies geology and seismology and what have you. It's not just me giving a hot take off the top of my head here. Many people have been warning about this, folks. It's nothing new under the sun. Okay, and he goes on to say that there are a lot of magnitude 6 plus earthquakes overdue in the Middle East, India, China, Japan, and the U.S., Fatahi told the official reports. It says here, there are some fault lines that have not released their energy for a while. And if a fault line, represented by two tectonic plates moving at different speeds and in different directions relative to each other, does not release energy, pressure continues to build, and the longer they go without releasing, folks, the more powerful it will be when they finally do. And it talks about that in this article here. So they've been warning for some time that some of these fault lines are hundreds of years overdue for massive earthquakes. And in fact, if you look at it, they got many nuclear plants, nuclear reactors situated along many of these fault lines around the world. And so it goes on to say that in the United States, scientists warn that California, Alaska, and Hawaii are at the greatest risk. And then it mentions how in 2008, the U.S. Geological Survey warned that an earthquake of a 7.8 magnitude or greater could result in over 1,800 deaths or more, and at least 50,000 injuries, and cause some $200 billion in damage. And the federal agency also warned that sewer systems could be taken out of service for up to 6 months or longer. And Mark Bensier, a director for communication, education, and outreach for the Southern California Earthquake Center, warned that the potential for a large earthquake is very high in California. So here you see another warning. And that pressure is building up, and eventually it's going to slip. He says, like snapping your fingers and release that pressure, he said. Just, I can't even snap my fingers right now, but that's what he's comparing it to. And, as a matter of fact, I mentioned earlier in the video, a Fukushima-like type earthquake potentially striking the west coast of the U.S., as many experts have warned of. And there in Diablo Canyon, on the central Pacific coast of California, there's actually a nuclear reactor still in use, which could lead to a disaster on the scale of Fukushima, folks. And the fact that these experts continuously to come out and warn of this is just more foreshadowing of the signs of the times and the great earthquakes that shall be in diverse places as the signs of the times continue to unfold. The links are below, guys. Until next time, this is Brother Joey signing off once again. God bless you guys and much love. This piece here from the Los Angeles Times came out, I believe it was yesterday, talking about how California scientists are warning of a megaquake, the big one, and how it's going to happen no matter how much people want to deny it. And, it goes on to talk about how fear of earthquakes is just part. Greetings, folks. More warnings here from scientists about the big one, the next massive megaquake to potentially strike California. And as we've seen in many reports from seismologists, geologists, other different scientists, and what have you, this is not a matter of if, but when it will occur. And as we'll see in a lot of these reports here that I'm going to link you guys up with in the description box below, these fault systems, not only there in California, but in many other regions around the world, are long overdue for high magnitude quakes, according to experts. And so part of life there in California, and people experience this anxiety in different ways. It goes on to talk about, for some, the fear prompts them to take steps to protect themselves, strapping down heavy furniture, securing kitchen cabinets, and retrofitting homes and apartments. And for others, the fear prompts denial, a willful ignorance of the dangers until the ground starts shaking, the report says. According to seismologist Lucy Jones, she spent her entire career trying to understand public attitudes about earthquakes with a focus on moving people past paralysis and denial. Jones said the way experts